practice in Granby, but I'm here on Thursdays and for the equine therapy. I'm a generalist, but I'm certified in EMDR therapy, and today we're gonna talk about that and equine-assisted EMDR therapy. Psychotherapy just means talk therapy. So, on the agenda, it's just what is EMDR, just to get an understanding of what it is. So there'll be a lot there, it'll sound a little clinical and complicated, but by the end, it should all fall into place. And then how it's different from other therapies, how horses help accelerate healing in EMDR therapy so that you can get to a resolution even faster than if you're just sitting in an office doing it. Then we'll do an activity, and I'll give it to you. There's pens over there. You can write or you don't have to. It's really just so that you can use it in the future or take down some notes, but we can do it together, and if you don't want to participate, that's fine. There's no talking that you have to do or anything like that. And it's a resourcing activity as part of EMDR, so you can actually see how it works and experience it on the resourcing side, which just means strengthening your inner resources and empowerment to help people state change at the end of sessions, because part of EMDR is kind of getting you triggered and really focused, opening up both sides of your brain in the trauma and desensitizing that and then enhancing the positive, but it takes a lot out of you. So this will be a good experiential activity. So EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. It's extensively researched, effective therapy method proven to help people recover from trauma and other distressing life experiences, including PTSD, anxiety, depression, and panic disorders. A lot of times people assume that if you have something like that going on, you just have to live with it and manage it, and you can actually fully resolve PTSD, panic disorders, and resolve anxiety and depression and get back to your baseline. These are organizations that recognize EMDR therapy as an effective treatment. There's a lot of research. So the APA, the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, National Alliance on Mental Illness, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, UK's National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, the US Department of Veterans Affairs and the DoD, the Cochrane Database of Systematic Reviews, and the WHO. So, EMDR has this adaptive information processing, AIP, that guides the therapy. It provides a model and a framework and principles for treatment. It's accelerated information processing. It clarifies how EMDR works and guides how it's used. It helps to transform disturbing information into adaptive resolution by integrating the information. So if you have a terrible memory that really affects you, something bad happens and it gives you, anxiety, we'll say. Usually there's a negative thought that you've internalized, like, I'm not good enough, I don't matter, or shame or something, and it desensitizes that part and the activation to the distress into adaptive. So like the rational part of you might know, I am good enough. This doesn't mean anything about me as a person, but you do the work from the emotional part of you. Trauma gets stored raw, unprocessed in our bodies, and so it's an adaptive information processing. And we'll talk more about it, but there's going to be a lot. It's going to be confusing, but it'll all come together and see. Memory networks make up the basis of our perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors. Our perspective creates the reality that we experience. Memories have stored information, thoughts, emotions, beliefs that are captured by our five senses, right? So disturbing events, whether big or small, are the primary source of the current distress or dysfunction. So something that has happened, right? Do you ever feel like the past is present? Like something happens and you're like, oh, I feel way more upset about this than I probably should. It's like a reminder of something from the past. When trauma happens, it causes a disruption in our information processing system. So it leaves associated sights, sounds, thoughts, and feelings unprocessed and stored in your body. So this is also kind of a body-mind focused therapy where like you'll ask, where do you feel that in your body? And usually like, if it's kind of like, if the negative thought is, I can't speak up for myself, people will feel it in their throat. Or if it's something about like an early attachment wound or somebody like who's supposed to be taking care of you treated you badly, you feel it in your heart, you know, it's pretty connected. And it helps people get in touch with that as part of the healing. So, why are there cookies and baking?
Oh, I got really excited.
EMDR is kind of like baking cookies. You know, use baking powder, baking soda, and then sugar and salt and flour, and it all comes together into delicious chocolate chip cookies, right? But it's like, how does that all come together to be something that tastes really good? EMDR's like that too. It's like, it's kind of weird, you know? But I'll explain more. Trauma, just to define it, the APA's definition, it's an emotional response to a terrible event. So like an accident, you know, people used to think of it as a life-threatening situation where you thought you would die, but really it's the small t traumas that are the most pervasive. So, you know, emotional neglect in childhood, or your first experience in school in kindergarten, you know, you feel like all proud of yourself, and then your teacher says, what are you doing? You did that wrong, that's terrible, right, in front of everybody. Then you grow up to feel like not good enough, you know? Those small t traumas are so pervasive that they'll affect you through your life. Whereas a bad car accident or something, it's like a single trauma. Most people that live to be adults have some kind of complex trauma going on, which is just a lot of that small t stuff. EMDR is also self-healing. Your brain knows where to go and how to heal. The therapist just kind of sets up the protocol and then gets out of the way and lets your own brain go where it needs to go. So like if you're doing dishes and there's a lot of bubbles and there's a knife in there and you get cut, you don't have to tell your skin how to heal. Your brain knows how to heal. Well, our brains know how to heal too, but sometimes some things that you've gone through in your life you can get over on your own naturally, but sometimes things get stuck, and that's where EMDR comes in. So therapists use EMDR for all sorts of things: anxiety, panic, phobias, which is an anxiety disorder, chronic illness, chronic physical pain. There's a chronic pain protocol that sometimes if somebody has a lot of medical stuff, I might use it with them in the first 15 minutes of a session just to get them comfortable enough to do the work they want to do. Or you can really just do the chronic pain protocol, and it goes to a part of your brain that can kind of ignore pain or desensitize it. Like when you're sleeping, you're kind of not always aware of pain so much, so you can have some rest. Depression, bipolar disorders, eating disorders, grief and loss, psychosis, PTSD and complex PTSD, sexual assault, sleep disturbance, and substance abuse and addiction, violence and abuse. There's a lot of different protocols that are manualized, but honestly the standard protocol, which is what we're really going to talk about today, works with everything unless there's a need for you to go in and use some kind of other thing. Like there's a chronic pain protocol, there's different protocols for addiction. Even with equine therapy, there's some that are manualized and some that are mounted, but we do unmounted here. And it's not manualized, it's just a standard protocol. EMDRIA.org, if you ever want to check out their website, there's a cool podcast that's free. There's a magazine called Go With That, that's I think quarterly. EMDRIA is EMDR's international association. It's a nonprofit professional association with over 16,000 members, and it's the original membership organization for EMDR therapists. There's a lot of trainings. And all right, so EMDR, it uses a three-pronged approach. It goes to the past, the present, and the future. And the targeting sequence plan, like the treatment plan, we identify past events and a touchstone event, if available, which is like the earliest time. You can use a technique to get people to the earliest time in their life where you felt that way before. So most people are either an I'm not good enough person or an I don't matter person, right? And it's interesting, in couples, in 85% of couples, one person is an I don't matter person and the other person is an I'm not good enough person, and it plays off of each other. And then the other percentage is usually they're both or they've resolved their stuff. But you can identify like the earliest time in your life where you felt that way before. Usually you can get people to like 7 or 8 years old. It's really interesting. They'll be like, oh my God, that's connected to this? Like, whoa. And then we encourage people to start with the past, but most times people come to therapy with something bothering them in the present. And it's okay if they have more access to that distress to go into the present, and a lot of times the past will be part of their reprocessing and the work, and that's okay. Present triggers is part of the treatment plan. Future template, which is, okay, we've resolved this maladaptive stuff and things are good. You want to kind of go to the future and say, what's a time in the future where you can anticipate something that could happen that could make you feel like that again, and then we'll process that so that they're good, and then it never comes back again. Sometimes people need a tune-up. You know, something in the present will trigger something, but really things resolve, and it's a lot faster than other therapies, and it's very measurable, like you know exactly what you're working on. Really good informed consent with EMDR, where it's kind of like the baking cookies analogy, but you really know and you really see changes in your life and you know what you're working on. Other therapies are like symptom management. Talk therapy is really helpful, but EMDR is transformational. It really resolves what you want to work on instead of just managing symptoms. So yeah, we encourage people to process in that order, past, present, future, but it's okay if they start in the present. So how it's different. Well, any questions so far about EMDR? You'll understand more about it like as we go on, but before we move on, yeah.
What does the term manualized mean?
Oh, like a manual.
Oh.
Like for some groups, like Seeking Safety is a group about like if you've had some domestic violence, you have chapters that you go through in the therapy, or CBT or DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy. It has like lots of coping skills on like emotion regulation and distress tolerance and interpersonal effectiveness, like assertiveness skills, and it's like you learn things from a manual or it kind of guides. And so for that equilateral EMDR, equine therapy, I think they go by a manual, and it's not as just go with the flow. It's really like more client-centered here, and you'll see, I have pictures too, we're gonna see kind of, not of clients obviously, because it's HIPAA, but, does that answer your question?
It does.
Yeah, okay. So this is how it's different from other kinds of therapy. EMDR doesn't require talking in detail about the distressing issue. A lot of times, so what it is we go in through a memory, which we call a target, and I'll open up both sides of your brain, a neural network using both sides, like asking you questions about what's an image that would capture the worst part about that as you think about it now. So not when the bad thing happened, but now. Could be anything, it could be something abstract. That's the right part of your brain, right side. You know, what's the negative thought that it makes you have? I'm not good enough. That's the left side. You know, where do you feel that in your body? That's the left side. What are the emotions coming up now? That's the right side. So you kind of get that fired up. So there's this dual awareness that happens where you have one foot, the participant has one foot in the room with you, the therapist, and one foot really in this memory. Like they're not back in the memory unless they're dissociating, but there's ways to deal with that. And a lot of times people do want to talk. You do the bilateral stimulation, I'll tell you more about what that is, and then they'll be quiet and just let their mind flow to wherever it wants to go. And then you'll say, what are you noticing? And they'll say, oh yeah, I just went back to another time in my life where I felt that way before, you know, or something. Or they'll break down a memory and notice different aspects of it that they haven't thought about before or see it in a different way. And a lot of times people do want to tell you everything they're noticing. I've had people say, I don't even want to tell you what the issue is that I want to work on because there's so much shame around it. And you know, like a lot of times people in therapy, they don't share everything or they underreport, especially if there's addiction, you know, how much they're drinking or using. And with EMDR, it's self-healing. As long as they know what to do or what to tell me, like, is it moving or are you getting stuck in the same place? Like, that's really all I need to know. So you can talk a lot. It kind of disrupts the flow because you just want to know just a little bit and then, okay, keep going until we know when to change what we're doing. It also doesn't require homework between sessions, but there's a lot of different coping things and resourcing, which is one that we'll do today, that you can do where there's different ways to remember if you're triggered throughout the week between sessions. There's a different there's an acronym you can use kind of to say, oh, this is what happened and this is kind of how it made me feel, which is what we're working on. And people can keep track of that stuff, but you don't have to do anything in between sessions. And the cool thing is, the processing continues even after the session. So we'll ask in the beginning of the session, like, what's different? Like, have you had any dreams? Do you have any new insights? Or do you think about other new memories? Or any, like you'll kind of ask, you'll use the first 15 minutes of the session to do that reevaluation, we call it. But you don't have to do any homework. EMDR supports the brain to resume its natural healing process. So like we said, trauma gets stuck. It just helps you just get unstuck from it and go back to your baseline. It's designed to process traumatic memories in the brain so that the person's informed by the memories but not controlled by them. So meaning it doesn't make a bad memory not a bad memory, but it makes it so that you're not activated by it. And part of the therapy includes either eye movements, taps, or sounds. So it's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing because the standard protocol says you should always start with eye movements. I found that, like people who wear contact lenses, or it gives you some eye strain, it makes you tired to move your eyes back and forth. Some people can process better with their eyes closed, so I have them use bilateral tapping. And kids like to use the butterfly hug, it's kind of like vibrates on your collarbone. People with shoulder issues, they can just tap on their knees, I had somebody who wasn't a client, they're a colleague, but she had to go to court. Sometimes as a therapist, you get called into court by DCF, it's really stressful. And she was doing eye movements just kind of slowly, because when you use it slow, it's to ground you. When you do it fast, it's for the reprocessing and desensitization of the trauma part. But she just kind of, nobody could tell she was doing it, but she was just kind of looking back and forth really slowly to keep herself grounded. Doctors in the ER, they'll kind of like, when they're triaging, just really slow. Or you might notice when people need to self-soothe, they can kind of rock back and forth. So BLS, we call it, it's bilateral stimulation. That just means back and forth, either eye movements, tapping, or sometimes the therapist will have headphones that do beeps or sounds. I have these things in my office called TheraTappers that you just put it on a setting either fast or slow, and the client can just hold them and they vibrate, like pulsate in their hands, so they can close their eyes and they don't have to do manual tapping or eye movements. And here, when we do this with horses, I have people most of the time use tapping because the eye movements, people just get distracted by everything, on the farm, or they don't want to move their eyes back and forth, and that's okay. And okay, how else it's different? EMDR therapy can be completed in fewer sessions than other therapies. And I do this through Zoom and also in person in my office. But here with the horses, it goes even faster. And it's more fun because the horses take care of the resourcing. Somebody will be crying and talking about the worst thing that ever happened, and then Taco will do something silly or fart, and they start laughing, and they're able to state change like naturally like that. And then you can, do a little grooming or a little, that's resourcing, it's therapeutic at the end, and it's so much nicer than being in an office, right? Just sitting on chairs. Measurable progress, and it's transformational, permanent resolution, rather than symptom management, like we said, and it's again self-healing. It's also standard. There's a protocol. It's very standardized. It's not just like talking and it's like, oh, I feel better after I talk, but I don't really know we're bringing up this trauma and what are we doing? We're just talking about it, So our brains have a natural way of recovering from traumatic events. Sure, there's a lot of things that we've gone through that we're like, yeah, I got over that. I don't know how. But it involves communication between different parts of the brain. The amygdala, that's like the alarm signal for stress, fight, flight, or freeze. Hippocampus helps with learning, especially about safety and danger. And the prefrontal cortex analyzes and controls behavior and emotion. So communication between those different parts of our brain is what helps us to understand things and put it into perspective and either get over it or get through it or be able to let go of something. But sometimes, many times, traumatic experiences can be managed and resolved spontaneously, like we said, but others may not be processed without help and they get stuck. Stress responses are natural fight, flight, or freeze instincts. When distress from a disturbing event remains, the upsetting images, thoughts, and emotions can create overwhelming feelings of being back in that moment, re-experiencing or being frozen in time. EMDR therapy helps the brain to allow the normal healing to resume. So again, the memory's still there. It doesn't make it not a bad memory. That would be weird. You don't want to walk around and be like, oh, that was fun when you got mugged or something. But the person is no longer activated by it. The original fight, flight, or freeze is resolved, and most importantly, that internalized negative thought it makes you have about yourself. Like when something happens, it doesn't mean anything about you as a person, but a lot of times if it's stuck, it can make somebody feel emotionally like, you know, I know I'm not worthless up here in the rational part of my brain, but this makes me feel worthless. And that's what EMDR, the negative internalized thought is how we kind of go in and understand what we need to work on and then find the target memory. So that negative versus positive internalized cognition is what creates the reality that we experience. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions so far about that part? Okay, so there's 8 phases to this EMDR protocol, therapy protocol, and each phase can include horses in the work. So we have a picture of Moon here because in phase 1, so that's history taking, like in any other kind of therapy, treatment planning, informed consent, which means this is what it is, what are your goals, this is what, you know, we're gonna do, and we'll take it slow and talk about safety and everything, and make sure people know what they're doing so that they don't feel like, I don't really know, I'm doing this weird therapy, but I don't really know. You do really good informed consent with people. Because if you don't talk about it in a way where people understand it, then they go tell other people, like, I'm doing this weird, and they'll say, you know, people are like, what are you doing? So in that first phase, I usually, as we're talking and kind of getting some history, the first time you meet somebody, you know, I don't know, if you go to therapy, right, there's an intake form that either you fill out or they ask you all these really personal, intrusive questions. So here, I kind of say, you know, this is also experiential with the horses, so you can tell me as little or as much as you want today. This is like the first session. You know, there's no pressure. And then people who might be guarded, they spill their guts and tell me their everything. Because you're walking around, the first area we come upon is Moon over there. So we'll stop and introduce Moon and maybe go in and it just falls into place really. So you're doing history taking, that takes a couple sessions, you're not getting everything in one session, but so that's phase 1. So they can kind of overlap too, it doesn't have to be a rigid order. But you do want to obviously do it in this order, but then you might go back and forth afterwards. Preparation is phase 2, that's like setting the stage for effective treatment. Resource development, which is what are your inner resources? Do we have to strengthen those? Like, what do you do to cope, or what's something maybe just, you know, damaging that you do to cope? That this is hard when you first start it, where you're gonna feel really tired, maybe really emotional, hypersensitive, and you know, we just want to make sure we know, like, we need to enhance some coping so that you have those things. So there's things that we show people that, for example, what we're going to do today is one of them, that this is then a tool they can use if they have a hard time. And installation is like just gaining more of those positive resources, and part of that is like helping people identify their own strengths and using that. Assessment is phase 3, and that's where you identify the targets. That's what we call we go in through a specific memory, and so we're kind of like just the headlines. What are the targets? You don't have to tell me all the details, but we kind of figure out where to start and map out a treatment plan. You assess for a negative cognition, so that's NC. PC is positive cognition, and there's usually a theme like I don't matter. Like a lot of these bad memories will be like, oh yeah, you're an I don't matter person. Of course, this is what we're going to work on. The desired state. What does the client want to feel at the end of this? If it was really helpful, what would you be feeling? And so that's actually kind of what we're going to do today. Is the positive future goal. Like you don't have to talk or anything or but you can for yourself. Imagine you wake up tomorrow and you've completely resolved an issue, whatever that issue is, you know, and I'll give you the form so you can use it on your own after you learn it today. So the desired state, the emotions, the body sensations, like where you feel it in your body. Oh my God, are we already running out of time? I'll go faster.
No.
And the vote is the validity of the positive cognition. How true does it feel that you are good enough right now? And the sud is the subjective units of distress. How much does this bother you? Think about now. Desensitizing the disturbance of the memory, installing the positive cognition, which is really just enhancing that neural network. That small part of you knows you're good enough, but we want to like make that fully known to yourself. Body scan is after it's done. Go from head to toe, scanning your body when you think about this memory, any tension, disturbance, discomfort, and then you kind of go back and clean that up. And then closure and reevaluation we do in the beginning of every session. That's the check-in. Okay. Horses help accelerate healing in EMDR therapy, and these are different reasons why or ways why. Resourcing, which we already talked about. Horses help with emotion regulation. And, you know, we know that they're prey animals, and so noticing how trusting they are of us helps increase our own insight, self-awareness, congruence, you know, like people with addiction, they're not congruent. They might not be honest with themselves. They might present smiling, but they're not smiling on the inside. So horses are very congruent, and they're emotional mirrors for us. They can be. And being with the horses in the work helps to strengthen the therapeutic rapport so that people are feeling safe quicker to do the work that they want to do. Boundaries, we know horses. Physical, spiritual, mental, emotional connection, partnering with a horse in the therapy. Noticing how the interactions with the horses can carry into your relationships. Experiencing relational attunement. They have such an ability to bond emotionally with us. Partnering with horses in this therapy can awaken what is suppressed and give you back that feeling of aliveness and presence in the moment, which is so important. Because a lot of times people are either like too much in the past or like worried about the future, and horses really help ground us in the present. And they're sentient. They can feel and show emotions and rely on nonverbal communication. They excel at reading and responding to signals beyond words. So that's all just anecdotal. That's what I noticed from this work. So these are different pictures of when I've done EMDR therapy with horses, and you can kind of see like which phase would this be? Like approaching in the cold spring, the muddy, trying to walk through the mud. Or with LJ, look at his eye, right? Like quiet eye. Ode to Kentucky. The playfulness can help people. You know, at the end we might walk around, even if they're doing EMDR with a horse in the cross ties, and they kind of shoulder up to the horse and ground themselves, plant their feet. George is good for this because he doesn't move, right? And then we'll say, let's go for a walk, and they feel so much calmer, you know. Is that Indy? Yeah. Indy is, you know. Okay, do we have time for this?
Yeah.
All right. And then I'll take questions. I think that was it. Yeah, all right. Okay. There are pens on the table. You don't have to write anything. This is just for you to have a in the future.
Yeah, you've got a-
or you can use this now.
Thank you. You've got a half hour. No, Nicole, you have a half hour. You have another half hour.
Oh, okay, great. So I don't have to rush it. I thought, oh my God, you're faster.
I can see it.
Whatever you want for this. This is part of resourcing. It's the positive future goal. Did you get one?
No. Yeah, thank you.
Did everybody get one? Yeah. So whatever, you can use whatever you want, it can be something big, it can be something small, and you can go back and change it up if you want to do this in the future and change it to whatever you want. So imagine you wake up tomorrow and you've completely resolved your issue with whatever. Think of something. And you don't have to talk or share this with anybody, but you're all just kind of doing this together now on your own, right? So take a moment to think about what that would be. Something that you'd really like resolution, you'd like it to be resolved. Now, the trick with this is, with these questions, what would your life look like with this issue resolved? So what you don't want to do is, well, I wouldn't be doing this and I wouldn't be doing that. It's only the positive. What would your life look like? You really want to visualize and get in touch with what would your life look like. Get an idea of how to conceptualize that. Because a lot of times it's hard to do that because we're like, well, I wouldn't be doing this and I wouldn't be feeling this way, instead of like, what would my life be like if this was resolved? So that's the trick, okay? And what would you be doing instead of whatever you're doing now, like every day, if your issue was resolved? How would you feel emotionally? So it's just the positive, not the negative. And what body sensations would you feel, or how would your body posture change if you achieved your goal? Give you a couple, I'll be quiet for a couple minutes and then the next part is a little specific.